Hello, New Hampshire. Welcome to the Jon Kiper Show. I'm Jon Kiper, and yes, I'm running for governor of New Hampshire as a Democrat. We're here in Manchester at the Cable Access TV studio, so thanks to the guys that are over in the other end of the booth making this all happen. Really appreciate them. So today I really wanted to talk to you all about a role in the New Hampshire government that a lot of people just do not really know about and do not understand, and that is the Executive Council. So the fact is, the governor of New Hampshire is, we call it a weak governor. And while I don't particularly consider myself weak, that's just what they call the job of governor in New Hampshire, because frankly, the governor doesn't have a lot of power on their own. They can veto bills, but aside from that, in a few other roles, they don't have a ton of power. And one of the balances of power with the governor is the Executive Council. So the governor generally works with the Executive Council to do a number of things, which we're going to get into in a second. So my guest today is Emmett Soldati, who is running for Executive Council. He's actually we're not in his district right now, but I thought it'd be a good idea for him to explain to you all what the Executive Council does. There's a lot of people running as Republicans and in Manchester in this district. And there's one Democrat, Jim O'Connell, who has his own show on cable access here, so you probably hear from him a lot. So I wanted to introduce you and the people of New Hampshire to another person who's running for Executive Council, and that's Emmett Soldati. Thank you.
Howdy.
How's it going?
Good to be here, John.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what the Executive Council does and what you hope to do as an executive councilor of New Hampshire?
Absolutely, yeah. So there are only, I think, 3 states in the entire country that have this form of an executive branch. And so in New Hampshire, we have our governor, and then we have 5 people that sit on a council that really execute the majority of affairs of what you would consider a governor to do. The way we tend to think of the sort of leading powers is any appointments that happen from a governor, sometimes other states it would go to a state senate, has to go through a 5-person vote. And that includes all the judges from our small claims courts to our New Hampshire Supreme Court. The governor would appoint a judge to a vacancy, but it has to get approved by a vote. So that's at least 3 people have to vote in favor of that judge. Every head of every commission or agency, so that the head of our Education Commission, the head of our Department of Energy, Public Utilities Commission, head of every single agency, and many times deputy commissioners, they'll get selected by our governor, but they aren't actually installed unless they're voted on by a majority vote of council. And then sort of another big aspect of council is contracts. Virtually all the money that our government spends sort of going out the door for different contracts, services, infrastructure, healthcare, energy. Again, the governor can bring the contract to the table. The Executive Council actually has the authority to vote on it or turn it down. There's a handful of other roles our Executive Council plays. They are also known as this sort of Transportation Council, so they lead on our 10-year infrastructure and transportation plan. So if you're concerned or worried about Central Rail coming to the state, that's going to be determined by the Executive Council. And they also deal with all pardons and commutations of sentences as well. So very powerful authority. Because we are one of 3 in the country that has them, very few people know what this is, even people that live here, whether they've lived here a long time or just moved here. And so it wields a lot of power, and much of that power is wielded sort of in the darkness of the sort of public's knowledge.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem that we have in New Hampshire is not just that these entities sort of operate in a way that a lot of people don't understand, but also that they're not really being covered by the media, because the local media has really just been defunded over the last several decades, and I think that's a huge problem. It's just, part of your job running for Executive Council is, number one, explaining to people what the Executive Council is.
Yeah, explaining and reminding. I ran for Executive Council in 2020. It was a different district at the time. And I will talk to people now that I'm running for council that I spoke to then, and they're asking for a little refresher and primer on it, because we really don't have many corollaries anywhere else. And a lot of times we see governors take credit for things or avoid blame for things based on knowing that these 5 people are going to vote in a different way. So, for example, we have had Republican governors put forward contracts for Planned Parenthood able to claim that they're supportive of Planned Parenthood, they're pro-choice, knowing that the Executive Council will vote down those contracts. And currently we have 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat on our council, and that is exactly how it has played out. They have voted to defund Planned Parenthood and several other reproductive health care centers innumerable times at this point. But you don't always catch or hear that that's who did it and that's what the news story was. But when you actually talk to these communities that have limited access to reproductive health care, it is because of a decision that was made on the Executive Council.
Yeah. When I first heard about the Executive Council, I think it was in 2010. I know Obama was president, and it was I think when they were first defunding Planned Parenthood. And it was, I found out about it. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I was 20, whatever, and I started calling up their offices to sort of complain and say, hey, it was 5 men at the time, and I thought it's absurd that 5 men would be having so much power over, women's medical choices and access to medical care. And the crazy thing was when I was calling up their offices to complain, I could tell by the people that were answering the phone that they weren't getting a lot of complaints. There wasn't a lot of activism happening in that way. Why don't you talk a little bit about your background? And you mentioned you were in for Executive Council before, but can you tell the people a little bit about who you are and what you've done in New Hampshire?
Yeah, so I hail from Somersworth, over on the Maine border. I was born in Rochester, but lived my whole life in Somersworth, and spent a little time abroad for college, but came back. And over a decade ago, I opened a cafe in my hometown called Teetotaler. And really, since returning to New Hampshire, have spent my entire career, not just as a business owner, but really focusing on building community. And I have sort of seen, especially in a sort of smaller, quieter town of Somersworth, that there really is an ongoing epidemic of isolation and people feeling like they don't have a lot of connections, they don't have a lot of relationships, and that we see cuts across folks with substance use disorders and addiction, and that's why a lot of small rural communities are hardest hit by addiction. And so to me, I really believe in New Hampshire, and my role as a business owner, as a community organizer, as a politician, has really been to connect people and bring people together, and also kind of dispel a lot of myths. I grew up in a state feeling like it was provincial, it was conservative, it was sleepy, it was monocultural, that there wasn't going to be a lot of opportunities for me, nor would I feel like I belong as someone that's part of the LGBTQ community. And I have seen a different side of New Hampshire as an adult and as a business owner, and I recognize that that's not something that everyone sees. And so whether it is organizing the first Indonesian food festival in New England, in Somersworth, or opening one of the first fair chance recovery-focused restaurants, also in Somersworth, or just hosting LGBTQ programming and drag shows here in New Hampshire. I really want people to understand that this is a place that they have neighbors with shared values, that they belong, and that has really been my role. Is I really believe in that aspect of New Hampshire, and I just think not everyone sees it.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Talking about what they call third place, where places we can meet in the community, such as cafes, library, that sort of thing. We're really losing those, and I've gone to a lot of smaller cities and towns in New Hampshire during my campaign, and seen a lot of empty storefronts. And some of these towns are really, cool, really cool towns. And it sort of breaks my heart to see all these empty storefronts as a restaurant owner. I was in Rochester last week, and there was 2 in right downtown that were empty, a little cafe and a little restaurant. And it was funny because I could see all the equipment in there. And as an entrepreneur, someone that's opened a restaurant, I just had so many ideas, and I really struggle with understanding why, why it's hard to maintain businesses in downtowns in some of these places. And I think part of it, I would assume, is that outside of downtown, we now have, a lot more fast food and sort of these, franchises. But what do you think we could do, as you being a business owner, to help people start, particularly like cafes and restaurants in downtowns? Because that's one thing that I think about a lot is like, I live in Newmarket. No one comes to Newmarket for the great insurance companies. No one comes because we have a great dentist, which we do. But they come because of the restaurants, the cafes, the little shops where people can buy, New Hampshire-made things or whatever. What could we do? And this is kind of bigger than the executive council, more of just statewide. What do you think we could do to help our downtown sort of revive and rebuild?
Yeah, I think we first need to understand a little bit how we got here when we think about, why are there sort of some towns that seem to be hitting it like right on the money and then others that just sort of seem to have lost these opportunities. And I say this, obviously I'm running for a position in government, and so this may sound like a stump speech, but our government has made a lot of mistakes historically, and to me it absolutely starts or comes close to starting with urban renewal. Newmarket is a mill town, Somersworth is a mill town. So many of these communities that had historically had a lot of infrastructure built around the railroads, around merchants, around commerce. In the 50s and 60s, there were people that sat around town councils and city councils and state government and said, the future looks like a parking lot. The future does not look like these brick mill buildings, and many of them got demolished. And there are so many examples in New Hampshire of you could see where the community held on and really salvaged and saved its downtown core, and some where it looks like they just totally carved out the center. Somersworth is certainly one of those where the center of our downtown is a parking lot, where once large historic built infrastructure was already there. That's already sort of embodied carbon. That's work that's already been put into that landscape that could be used for housing, for restaurants, for businesses, and so forth. And urban renewal really set course for a trajectory of mismanagement that really brought us up until the 90s of we had lost so much tax base because everything is local taxes, that the only option that many communities felt that they could do is sell to the largest bidder, and that was big box stores. And when you were looking at the sort of what appeared to be a tax windfall of a Walmart or a Target or a Home Depot, you probably said yes. And Somersworth is a community that said yes, destroyed a lot of our conservation and farmland, and then ultimately was the nail in the coffin for what was then a struggling but an attempt at downtown businesses. And that was yet another example of municipal mismanagement, lack of foresight, lack of vision, that led us now to a situation we're in now, where it is on the backs of young entrepreneurs and small business owners to really take a go at their dream, their vision, their plan, when they are up against so many challenges of just the culture has changed. We have created through this sort of big box suburbanification of New Hampshire that people don't even think to patron or drive to the downtown because they can get everything they need at these power centers on the outskirts of our downtowns. The economics don't play out as well because if you're surrounded by several fast food chains that have economies of scale, that do not have as much trouble hiring folks but still can pay lower wages, then you are also faced with an economic model that a 1% profit margin doesn't look great to any aspiring business owner. And so I think we are actually playing a lot of catch up to decisions that, when I opened my cafe, I thought I'll make a go of it. It's, people will, if I build it, they'll come, not realizing that there was a series of decisions that had been made leading up to me finding that place that were actually putting me in a situation that I was likely to fail. And that's why we see so many small business owners struggle, especially in that first year. You add to it then access to capital, especially now when a commercial loan is 9%. You can't pay off 9% and pay yourself in most industries that happen on Main Street. So we are up against a lot of challenges now, but we have to recognize that this happened because of a series of decisions and lack of foresight and planning and vision that got us here. And I hate to sort of put it on the backs of any one restaurateur or one arts organization or business owner, because they need more support because they have actually been sort of underfunded, undersupported, under-resourced for so long, and yet they're still making a go of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I like to call it the Walmartification of our sort of economy, where, Walmart came in and everyone thought, oh, this is great. We've got, low prices. And all of a sudden they start to see, the hardware store downtown is gone, and the old toy store that was there is gone. And it's really heartbreaking. I mean, it's one of the reasons I got into politics on a local level, was that we did not really have enough parking in my end of town, and I thought perhaps there's something I could do about this if I get involved. And it was funny because that's sort of where I fell down this rabbit hole of, okay, there's not really money for parking because the taxes are going towards the school, because we had to rebuild the school. And then you're like, well, why are the taxes high for the school? And you realize, oh, it's because the state doesn't fund the schools well enough. And you fall into this all these systemic issues, and the realization that yes, it's been, literally decades in the making, these problems. I mean, one of the funny things about Newmarket is that, around 2006, they did this beautification project downtown, buried the power lines, widened the sidewalks so that the restaurants could have tables outside. And then, Chimberg came in, redid the mills, which was really helpful in around 2010. And so it's funny because by 2018, 2019, we started having a parking problem because we suddenly had twice the number of restaurants, and they're good restaurants and people want to come. And I said to one of the town councilors who was on the board in 05, 06, 07 when they were negotiating with Chimberg about the mills, and I said to him, why didn't you guys think about a parking garage? You spent $53 million on the building, or he did, a couple million for a parking garage. Really, back then it was a lot cheaper to build, cheaper to lend. It seems like it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. And he looked at me and he said, he was like, Johnny, if somebody told us in 2005 or 2006 that Newmarket would ever have a parking problem, you would have been laughed out of the building, because it was never even on the table. We didn't even know if this whole thing would work at all, if redoing the mills was going to be helpful or not. And so, I mean, I think it's just an interesting perspective that it's like, sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of continuity. Like one town council is there, and those people are really active for 4 or 5, 6 years, and then they sort of drift off, and new people come on. And sometimes I sort of feel like, and maybe this exists, I just never saw it when I was on the council, but like we almost need like a history, because like at one point, this was funny, they were looking into doing a boardwalk by the river in Newmarket, and I was telling one of the former councilors, I'm like, hey, they're working on this boardwalk thing, and he started laughing. He goes, we already did that like 10 years ago. We wrote the whole plan. It's somewhere in a file someplace. And just since in that time, the town manager had changed, the whole council had changed. And I feel like that is true with the state as well, particularly with like the 2-year cycles of the governor, and a lot of the, and basically all these positions are turning over so frequently that there's not this continuity, and not this, I think sometimes a lack of, we have our 10-year plan, but how realistic is that, how much are we holding to that? And then, is that, sometimes it needs to evolve faster than basically the systems allow.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the state level, I might disagree and say there's probably been too much continuity. That too much of the power has been consolidated.
That's
around
true. Yeah, no, that makes
family,
sense as well. Yes, yeah.
For too long, and some of the folks, even executive council. When I talk to people that are sort of starting to pay attention or have known about it, it didn't used to be thought of as a sort of political position. Obviously, it always has been. It's always been an elected position, but it often seemed many folks at the end of their political career would look for a seat on the executive council, have the ear of the governor, et cetera. And only recently we've seen Chris Sununu as a former executive councilor, Colin Van Ostern ran for governor, Chris Pappas, our congressman, former executive councilor. It has now sort of been added into play as an active political role, which I actually think is good for that position, because the decisions that are being made on the council, currently the average age of our council, these are 5 people, is 67.
Wow.
No one is under the age of 60. And when you're making decisions about
reproductive health
care, of the cost of housing,
Yeah.
Of transportation in our economy. Shouldn't we have people on the council that are impacted by those decisions? Really not a single person is. And so much of the council's role impacts today and tomorrow. And if you own your own home and you don't need to worry about your income anymore, you have 2 cars in a garage and you're not worried about transportation, how are you going to make decisions about what the needs of the entire district or the entire state are if that has not been your lived experience for 20 and 30 years? And for many of these people, even if they have been in New Hampshire for that long, the New Hampshire that they lived in when they were in their 30s didn't have the things that we are facing in terms of the mounting student loan debt, the cost of housing. I mean, it sort of blows my mind, whether statewide or on city or town select boards, the absence of renters.
Yeah.
Because how can you talk about the affordable housing or the housing crisis if you're sitting in a home that you own, that you have a mortgage that is, that was maybe 10, 20 years set? You literally do not know what it looks like. And for so many people to think, if I'm a renter, if I lose for whatever reason where I live, there is no guarantee I will even be able to live in Somersworth. There's no guarantee I'll be able to live in New Hampshire. And it's like, that feels very destabilizing. I'm running for a statewide office and there's no sure thing. And I really don't see a sense of urgency around this issue. And it's unsurprising when so many people don't live it on a regular basis.
Yeah, the sense of urgency was really one of the things that compelled me to run for governor. Was when I was in on the town council and ZBA and stuff, there was no sort of emergency mechanism through which the departments that we needed were going to get approved. And the people on the boards can say, oh, let's put this off for another, let's vote next time, or let's delay this a little bit. You guys don't quite have your paperwork right, and that sort of thing. And it was crazy. I went and spoke in favor of some workforce housing that was going to be in Newmarket, and it was in what I thought was an undesirable location for anything else because it was literally on the train tracks. It was a derelict building. There was already a parking lot there. And I said, I need employees. My employees need housing. This is a great solution. And one of our state reps, who is retired, reached out to me and said, I don't think this should go in there. It doesn't suit the neighborhood and parking, blah, 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 blah. And I said, you own a home. And it seems to me a little bit wrong for sort of the homeowner class to say to people that want lower rents and need affordable housing, for you to say that we shouldn't have that. You don't even live near this area. Like, what do you care? And it was so funny because he said, my housing has nothing to do with this. And I thought, telling. It's just telling that he couldn't even fathom the fact that he probably paid off his mortgage a decade ago. He hasn't had to look for an apartment. And it just blows my mind the number of Democrats who are still NIMBYs. Like, I don't think you can do that. I don't think, in my mind, those two worlds don't work together. You can't say, oh, I support working class people, and say, oh, not in my town. There's this meme going around. It's like about a progressive person saying, oh, I support housing. Maybe I support affordable housing. Maybe one town or two towns over from mine. It's like never where they are. And it just drives me absolutely crazy. How have you been finding the campaign trail in general? Because, I've been having a lot of fun. I think it seems like you've been having a good time too.
Yeah, so as mentioned, not my first rodeo. I ran for the council in 2020, and at the time I lived in District 2. I haven't moved, but the maps were redrawn. And at that time it was like, where I live, Stratford County, Concord, all the way over to Keene in Cheshire County.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's totally different.
Totally different. Super blue, classic textbook gerrymandering.
Yeah.
There are more votes for a Democratic candidate for executive council than Republican, and yet we keep getting a Republican council, and it's because of gerrymandering. got redistricted, and now I'm in District 1. That goes from Durham in the south up to the Canadian border.
Massive district.
Yeah, it's 1/5 of the population and half of the state. So we got the lakes, got the mountains. Definitely a lot of mileage is a big part of it. But any issue that we talk about, housing, healthcare, you'll hear the same stories told in Berlin and Lancaster and Wakefield, but it's amplified. And they're just so much more strapped for resources, and it's definitely, some of these issues are pressure cookers when they suddenly will lose, a superintendent or an HVAC system breaks in the school system, and how are they going to fund, these additions? They're used to losing healthcare centers. That's sort of a feature of life that maybe we don't see as often in the southern part of the state. And so they're waiting for answers, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on, because this is obviously a massive part of the conversation right now, about how we should fund the school system? For those of you who don't understand or haven't heard about this, basically the public schools are primarily funded by local taxpayers. About 70% of the bill is your local property taxes. And the result is that the poorest towns in New Hampshire pay the most as a percentage of their income towards public education, and the richest towns in New Hampshire pay sometimes almost nothing towards public education. And this is what we call a regressive system. The rich benefiting from this system. So we need a progressive tax system. Now we've tried a statewide sales tax, and the people who had to pay that complained. So we stopped doing that, and now we don't have a lot of options. And do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, you're well to point out that there's two issues to this. One is the revenue, that the state needs to increase revenue in certain ways. You've talked obviously about legalizing cannabis as a big one. So we need to look for new revenue sources. And two, it's the distribution of it.
Yeah.
When the state is 50th in the country for state funding for public schools, to me that is just totally wrong. It creates such an inequitable position. I'm hoping that some of the recent litigation or Supreme Court decisions that have shown that our state is not providing adequate education will set things into the balance, because a public school student in Somersworth doesn't deserve any less than a public school kid in Moulton Borough. Both of those communities are in my district, and everyone benefits in those districts when everyone is educated to the same standard. And so we need to look at how we're allocating, and the state has absolutely abdicated its responsibility.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Emmett. Have a good night, guys.